Now that we have covered the important steps that you should take in the first 3 minutes of a traffic stop, let's shift to another topic: communication. The way that you communicate with a police officer will have a huge impact on their willingness to give you a warning rather than a ticket. There are 3 things that you should focus on when you communicate with police officers. First, you should greet the officer by saying, "Good morning" or "Good afternoon." Use their name. "Was I going over the speed limit, Officer Gomez?" When asked a question, reply with a "Yes, sir" or "No, sir." Keep your answers very brief, and your replies need to be yes or no, if possible. When the police accuse you of a traffic violation, do not comment or add to the story. Why don't we look at a real-life example as we hear Lewis and his mother talk about his recent traffic stop?
So you got stopped by the police. Tell me what happened.
Well, I was going slightly over the speed limit and the officer pulled me over. In the first few minutes, he introduced himself as Officer Gomez. So I used his name and title during the entire traffic stop. I answered his questions, but kept my answers short, and I purposely tried to not add to his comments. I was very polite, even though I did not agree with everything he said. At one point, he said I was talking on the phone, which I wasn't. He let me off with a warning. I was really nervous, but I followed the 3 steps that we learned in the training, and it worked.
It sounds like you put these new skills to work. Being polite and cooperative often results in a warning rather than a big ticket. Good job.
In the early few moments of the traffic stop, you may be asked to answer a number of legitimate questions. Questions like, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Or, "Do you know how fast you were going?" Take a minute to study this slide. These questions are relevant, and yet police officers sometimes begin to ask you personal questions that have nothing to do with the traffic stop. Let's look at the kind of questions that you should avoid answering. Answering personal questions is a dangerous practice because the conversation often leads to the driver sharing information that could eventually come back to hurt them in court. Answering the question, "Have you been at a party," for example, will more certainly lead to a question about drinking. Or answering a question about where you are employed could lead to a question about how you can afford to drive such an expensive car. The officer now wonders if the car is stolen. It is best to keep the conversation focused on the traffic stop. Let's move on. If you feel that the officer is asking a lot of personal questions, you can always say that you would prefer to remain silent. You may say it in the following way: "I don't see how these questions are relevant to this traffic stop. I would prefer to exercise my right to remain silent." Say this in a very polite voice that shows respect for the officer. So to summarize what we have just covered, 3 things to remember when you are communicating with a police officer. Be polite and respectful by using the officer's name. For example, Officer Gomez or Officer Smith. Answer with a "Yes, sir" or "No, sir." Keep your replies to his questions as short as possible, and don't add to his description of your violation. Finally, don't argue with the officer. You will get your chance to argue in court. Let's move on to a new module where we deal with more difficult situations. In the next module, we will look at things that people say that will predictably anger a police officer and lead to a confrontation. Then we will look at ways to lower the tension and de-escalate the situation.